How can newsletter senders tell that I've not opened their email? I can usually, sometimes tell whether or not you've been paying attention to my newsletter. Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. This is a question I got some time ago. I'm sure that I read in one of your newsletter emails that people don't know if we read emails that we send to them. So can you please explain this email that I received today? Dear reader, we noticed you haven't been reading our emails lately. How did they know? So there's a very, very subtle piece of wording that I'm generally very careful to use when I talk about this topic. And that subtle wording is this. It is impossible to reliably tell if your email has been opened or read. So in a one-on-one case where you're trying to understand whether or not a person has opened your email, you don't know with 100% certainty that that person has, unless you get some specific feedback of some sort. However, when you're sending a newsletter, when you're sending hundreds or thousands of newsletters out there, reliably isn't quite as important. What you really care about are statistics. I'll just call them statistics. Because sometimes you can get information from some of the readers that says, yep, they opened it. And I'll tell you what those indications are. But you're not going to get them from everybody. And you're not going to be able to choose who you get them from. And that's what makes this essentially useful for mass mailings and completely useless for individual mailings. So how do we tell? Well, it's something called open tracking. I've talked about it before. There are generally two approaches. One is that the email that's been sent will be crafted to include an image of some sort. But the image itself will not actually accompany the email. What will be in the email is a reference to that image. So what that means is, under normal circumstances, when that message is opened to be viewed, at that time, the message is retrieved from the server on which it's stored. In other words, when I send you an email message, you get my newsletter, and you open it, and you see like my header, my logo at the upper left-hand corner. That's an image. Your email program had to reach out to my server to get that image. So when that happens, not only does that reference to the image include, hey, I want this image, it also includes additional information that says, oh, by the way, so-and-so is the email address requesting this image. And by the way, it's for this issue of your newsletter. That way, that additional information that accompanies the request for the image tells me, yep, you've opened the email. If I never get that notification, okay, I don't know. You might have opened it and just not fetched the image, or you might not have opened it at all. The second method is what they call an inferred open. Throughout my newsletter, there are links to articles, links to third parties, and this is true for any newsletter. Those links are often either run through click trackers or they are run through other software that, with the cooperation of the receiving side, can also track that the click has happened. The logic is actually fairly simple. If you clicked on that link, well, you must have opened the newsletter to do so. So simply clicking a link in a newsletter will also often tell the sender that you opened that email. Again, the link will include additional information. It'll say, hey, this person wants to go to this page, and by the way, this person is this subscription for this newsletter, and this is the link that they're trying to click on. So both of those techniques are ways that newsletters can determine whether or not you've opened an email. But as I said, they're not foolproof. Email programs tend not to display images by default for exactly this reason, because I will do it to understand how many people are actually looking at my newsletter. Spammers do it to understand how many people are actually people reading their spam. So email programs will say, hey, I'm not going to fetch any remote images until you, the reader, tell me that it's okay. But even so, if you never view an image, if you never click on a link, then whomever has sent you that newsletter has no way to know whether or not you've opened it. And of course, I have to include this somewhat, I guess it's obvious. Opening an email newsletter, opening any email, doesn't mean you actually read it. There's no way for us to know whether or not your eyes actually read each word or even understood the concepts. And trust me, we have plenty of examples of people who react to something clearly indicating that they haven't read something that they're reacting to. They may have opened it, but they didn't read it. But that's, again, not something we can do. Now, why do I care? Why do I care if people are opening up my newsletter? Why do I care if any individual is opening my newsletter? Well, as an individual, I honestly don't. I mean, it's great. I want you to open the newsletter. I hope I'm providing value to you so that you do open the newsletter. But you as an individual, I'm less concerned about. What I am concerned about is that when I send my email newsletter to, say, 10 or 20,000 people, if half of them never open the newsletter, that's important information for me. It's telling me that my newsletter might not be hitting the target that I want it to. Or better yet, if I send out a newsletter that has like half a dozen links to half a dozen different articles, the number of people that click on each one tells me a little bit about how interested they are in the very topics that I'm presenting. Again, I'm not caring about them as individuals, but I am caring about the aggregate information. The number of people that open my newsletter, the number of people that look at specific articles. And most importantly, whether or not I can tell whether or not you opened an email, your email provider often can. For example, if you're on Gmail, Gmail by definition knows whether or not you opened the email. So they can then use that as information to feed their spam filter. If I send out a newsletter and nobody opens it, Gmail can use that as information to say, well, nobody's interested in this. It could very well be spam. It's a mark against me as a newsletter sender. On the other hand, if every edition of my newsletter gets opened by every Gmail recipient, that too tells Gmail, yeah, this one's good. This has a better reputation. So understanding what my open rates are and how they change over time is very, very important to me as an email sender, again, to make sure I'm hitting the target, I'm delivering the value, I'm actually giving people what they want. So what about that message? Something that some newsletter senders do, and I do it every year in the spring, I call it spring cleaning, is we will take a look at, okay, who hasn't opened our message for, like, say, the last 3 months or the last 6 months or something like that. Each sender will have their own criteria. My criteria tend to be, if I do it in the spring, it's people who subscribed before this year but haven't opened anything this year. Well, they're not opening. As far as I can tell, they're not looking at the newsletter. Therefore, I will proactively remove them from their subscriptions. Why? Well, it's a percentage game. By removing the people that don't open the newsletter, I have increased the percentage of people that do. And that percentage, again, plays into reputation, which almost all of the major email recipient providers, Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook.com, etc., use as one of their many signals for what is and is not spam. If the open rate is high, then it's probably okay. If the open rate is low, well, it might not be. Therefore, by removing the people that don't open the newsletter, the open rate, the percentage, ends up being higher. Now, there is sometimes what I'll call collateral damage. You are one of those people, for example, that reads the newsletter with images turned off and you never click a link. Well, I'm not going to be able to know that you have opened the newsletter. And there's a really good chance that come spring, you may stop getting it because you look like one of those people that haven't been reading the newsletter. There's nothing I can do about that. It's important. List cleaning for me is important as an email sender, as a newsletter sender. The thing you can do is every once in a while, enable images or click a link or do something. But that's about the only real solution. The good news here is that it's rare. It doesn't happen very often. Because of the nature of the content, most people who are actually interested in the content will either see the images or click on a link. Great, you're taken care of, not an issue. But if you're not, if you're one of those who doesn't, then yeah, it may stop getting it. But that's why that newsletter that you're getting asked you, hey, you haven't been opening it for a while. Well, as far as they can tell, you haven't, and that could signify a complete lack of interest on your part, and that could mean that the right thing for them to do is to remove you from the distribution. Hope that helps explain a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes when people are sending newsletters. For updates, for comments, for links related to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/12232. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.